So welcome everyone to the first ever Vegan Greens Deputy Leadership Hustings. My name is Meghan Tinsley. I'm a member of Manchester Green Party and co-founder of VeGn Greens, which is a newly affiliated GPAW special interest group. VeGn Greens is an intersectional group committed to opposing prejudice against any marginalized, exploited, oppressed, subjugated, silenced, or harmed group. We are committed to nonviolence and strive to do as little harm as possible to ourselves, to each other, to our planet, and to all living beings. Tonight's hustings will provide the opportunity for deputy leadership candidates to discuss a range of issues related to ethical veganism, from plant-based diets and animal rights to their broader visions of a more just society. We are delighted to be joined in person by 5 of the 9 candidates, and we're very grateful to Alex, Annie, Frank, Rachel, and Thomas for joining us this evening. Additionally, Antoinette, Ash, and Mothan have sent their apologies, and Chas has submitted his responses to the questions in writing. So we'll share those aloud as we go along. Additionally, all 9 of our candidates will have the opportunity to commit to a list of pledges compiled by the members of VeGn Greens. So please do look for those results in the next few days.
All right, candidates, please introduce yourselves. For everybody's ease, what we've done is we put down the names in order that we would want them to respond in. So Rachel, you're up first, followed by Frank, then Ani, then Alex, and then Thomas. So Rachel, you're up, please.
So my name is Rachel Millward. I share the leadership of Wealdon District Council, which is a rural council in Sussex. My professional background is in the creative sector, in cultural arts leadership. I founded an international women's film festival, led that for 10 years, then worked in community arts and then in live music nature organisations. I'm a founding member of the Friends of the River Medway and a conservator of the Ashdown Forest.
Thank you all for hosting this hustings tonight and for inviting us along. It's fantastic to be able to talk about this, and as a vegan, I'm very excited that these hustings are taking place. I'm a councillor in North East Derbyshire, and I'm the vice chair of the Environmental Scrutiny Committee there as well, able to hold the council to account on all things green. And I was also the mayoral candidate for the East Midlands as well last year.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Annie Townsend. I've been a member for 15 years. I'm in Bristol. I've been a key part of building Bristol Green Party up to what it is now, from when it was just a small group of us around a table to the massive local party with an MP that we are now. I'm a councillor. I'm in my 3rd term. I've been group leader of the councillor group. I've been the coordinator or chair of Bristol Green Party during its time where we gained control of the council and an MP. I was the Bristol East candidate, which was the strongest 2nd place in the country for the Green Party. I'm a freelance theatre professional, and I'm the lead for culture in Bristol. I'm also working class, disabled, queer, trans, and a single parent as well. And I think my lived experience would bring a huge amount to the party as a deputy and for representation of the communities that we seek to represent in the future and need to appeal to. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So thank you to Meghan and Prashant for putting on these hustings. I am Alex Mace. I use the pronouns he, him. I'm a city councillor and co-leader of the Green Group here in Worcester, as well as vice chair of the Policy and Resources Committee. And I'm also the election strategy officer for Worcester Green Party. And in May, we delivered the most councillors in Worcester for the county council and won the popular vote for the 3rd year running. Aside from that, I am the chief technology officer for a small company making software for pubs and restaurants. So, you know, anything from tills to staff management to rota management software, that's what we do. And I bring that kind of organisational experience into my Green Party stuff. I will be honest at the outset and say I'm not a vegan, but I'm very happy to work with VeGn Greens to advance your agenda. Thank you.
Hello, hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Thomas Daw. I'm a councillor down here in North Somerset, which is just below Bristol, southwest. So I'm 21. I was the youngest Green Party councillor until the last lot of local elections, and I'm basically just here to try and get the agenda on young people better representation in the party, but also to kind of build the morale and the networking that we need to better ourselves as a party. So I've been the Southwest Elections Coordinator for about 3 years now, at which time we are now the biggest regional party in terms of councillors and membership and just overall electoral success.
Thank you. So I think the first thing is that the Green Party, as we can probably guess, has the best story to tell to promote veganism. Plant-based diets are better for the environment, full stop. But it does go further than that. So plant-based diets are also more inclusive because certain religions have restrictions on types of meat they can eat. A plant-based diet, can be eaten by all. Although, as like I said, I've already said I'm not a vegan myself. I think it is possible that my own promotion of veganism will be more acceptable as something that's necessary for the environment, rather than being possibly perceived as being lecturing from a position of superiority, which I'm not saying anyone here or in the group does, but I think that sometimes the speaker's intent with promotion of environmental issues or veganism does not always match the listener's interpretation of what we're saying. So if I take an example from Worcester, so we had a Green Mayor in Worcester in 23-24, who's the first Green Mayor we'd ever had. He himself is a vegetarian. He only offered plant-based options after full council meetings. And we had one councillor who objected to that as the mayor imposing his personal choices on everyone else. And I think that it could be that became an international news story. And I think if it had been handled up front that we were saying we were doing this because of environmental reasons linked to things that people experience in our city, like flooding. We were flooded 5 times in the winter, and we've had drought and heat waves through the summer as well. We can point these things out and saying these are environmental choices that will help improve the situation. So I think as a general rule, I would follow up on what others have done, and this fits in with the 2 questions, I think, the 2 supplementary questions. So I know Zach Polanski has raised at the London Authority, London Assembly, pushing for the default provision of catering, not just Green Party events, but any catering offered by authorities, so that could be hospitals and councils and schools as well, to be the default plant-based. And to be clear that we're not trying to make everyone vegan, but generally reduce the meat eaten by all. I would definitely advocate for being vegan if you can. If you can't, minimise the usage of animal products, and if you do use animal products, use products that are cruelty-free and as local as possible. I think this makes it clear that there's something everyone can do. It's not just a binary choice of veganism or not.
Seem to have lost the little slideshow on my screen, but I can wait for it to come back up, or I can kind of go on with what I think the question was. I mean, I'm vegetarian. One of the reasons that I struggle to be vegan is just because of I think it's there we go. Cool. Thank you. So yeah, so I say one of the reasons that I struggle to be vegan a lot of the time is that kind of the options that there are the accessibility to be it. I don't earn a lot of money. I live in quite a busy house with lots of younger brothers and parents that don't really believe in it. So for me as an individual, it can become quite difficult, just basically down to that accessibility. I think it's something similar as when we're talking about people should use more public transport, is that, well, we can only kind of get to that point if the option is always there. So for me, it would be actually, rather than calling immediately for this thing, is how do we build the baseline up so that when we do call for these call for more plant-based diets, that people are actually able to explore that themselves and make the decisions to do that. So I've been vegetarian since I was 6, when I was told actually where meat comes from, and that you have to sacrifice a life of something for this to be on your plate. And 6-year-old me went, that's abhorrent. I'm not, well, I probably didn't say abhorrent because I was 6, but I didn't agree with it, and I decided that from that point I want to be vegetarian. And actually I say the bullying I got from even people in my family for going, oh, why would you want to do that? Even now to this point, is quite interesting, because there's just such a strange cultural thing about being vegetarian or vegan. It's seen as being lesser, it's seen as being weak and too emotional a lot of the time. And I think we really need to move that culture away from it if we're going to get to this point of where we can kind of, like I say, just bring people to the idea of going for the plant-based diet. And to me, the biggest one for that is education, is getting into our schools, actually teaching about the meat industry, and stopping the promotion of meat being this thing that you need in your life to grow up big and strong, and changing the way that we do that about it. But yeah, I when I was a lot younger, I tried to start a petition to have it on packaging that it says when something is not vegetarian or not vegan. Unfortunately, it didn't get off the line because I was young. I didn't know many people back then, but I was looking to redo it again soon. But for me, that's another one that I find quite difficult, is sitting there trying to read through all of the ingredients in the foods to see if it's safe for me to eat or not. So that's kind of what I would do, is just allow us to have a base that's functioning to be able to then call on these ideas.
So I want to be completely honest that I'm not a vegan, but I really do share many of the values at the heart of it: the compassion, the non-violence, and a deep respect for animals and for this planet. I guess I come from a deep belief that all life is sacred, that we're a part of nature, not separate from nature. For me, that doesn't end up in veganism, but of course, changing our food systems urgently and radically, and definitely moving towards much more plant-based diet, has to be a part of the journey to health for us, for our planet, and for animals. So I really proudly represent the underlying values in the Green Party, definitely making sure we're always calling for food systems that are just and sustainable and kind. And again, I think it's, as are so many of our policies, they work for our health and well-being as well as the planet and other beings. And I'd make sure that message always focused on the system more than it did on individual actions, and certainly not shaming individuals, which I think others have said. I think it's about us presenting a vision of hope and making that as easy and practically doable as possible, rather than adding stress onto already stressed lives. Sometimes you just need the very next step. You need to have options, as has been said, and you need to know this is healthy and affordable and all the different benefits that it would bring. And in terms of those specific sub-questions, I think with many things, basic toolkits. So for all councillors, there could be a really easy campaign, kind of, this is the 10 points to getting your council to be plant-free. We've gotten into a lot of councils, so that's an obvious one. And the same with institutions. So I think, just clearly making the case for this being good for our health, for the planet, and for everybody, doing it in a light and positive and hopeful way, and doing very practical, step-by-step, clear, accessible tips.
So I've not eaten meat for 10 years now, and as a vegan, I feel a real sense of duty and responsibility, given that it's such a core part of my politics and where my opinions come from, to present that in the most relatable and relevant way to people when I'm speaking to them. My politics comes through my diet because I find a real importance of trying to practice myself as an individual, what I want to put out there in the world. And for me, that's rooted in kindness and compassion, and not wanting to take the life of another being to be able to live my own. And so when I'm talking to people, I try to get across this sense of eating already all of the things that other people eat, that my beans on toast and jacket potato and pasta is the same as yours, and trying to really create that relevance between people, and trying to show that we're just not all that different. I presented a motion to my council on veganism, on plant-based food, and again, speaking to the council at that time in a way which was showing that at previous events where they had vegetarian and vegan options, that those had all been eaten up before all of the other options, given that, and that was a surprise given that I was the only vegan, and just showing that these are things that everybody can eat, and that we should have food options that are available for all, and that we're actually at times making things easier. During the East Midlands mayoral campaign, I took 2 armchairs out into Nottingham city centre, and I placed them down, and people could come up and ask me questions. And there was a disproportionate amount of people who came over saying, "Oh, you're not anti-meat, are you?" And I kind of remember some of these conversations. And so there's a feeling, I think, amongst people sometimes that we're taking something away from them, and the importance to all of us about what we put in our body. But I want to try to communicate, and I think I have been successful in those conversations, and in other conversations that I've had, in trying to show that what we're doing is about kindness and compassion, and that this can be accessible. And I think that sometimes we just need to think about how we talk about that. And I certainly want to be an advocate for that in any role that I hold in the Green Party, in my life, in the public world, and making sure that we're all practicing the best that we can, and understanding that this isn't about a few of us doing things perfectly, but all of us doing it imperfectly if we really want to see change in the world.
God, going last is as hard as going first, I think. There's been some really great points that have been made, so I'm not going to repeat those points because we all know why it's an important concept. I think everybody's got that understanding. But so when I was growing up, a bit like with Thomas, so I was vegetarian growing up. In the 1980s, in a complete flip to how things are now, meat was so expensive and being vegetarian was the cheaper option. So my entire family were vegetarian. And then when my parents went back to eating meat, I stayed being vegetarian as a child, because just like Thomas, I was like, oh, this is like horrible idea of where this is coming from. Unfortunately, I've had to give up being a vegetarian for health issues. But I do continue to choose plant-based diet as much as I possibly can. And I think that's why I'd be a good advocate for veganism and plant-based diets, because like many people, and touching on points other people have already made, is that actually it's not, I mean, systemic change is what we need, and individual changes, no matter how big or small, all add up. And it's not, it can be incremental. It doesn't have to be, ideally it would be everybody goes plant-based, and we will hopefully get to that situation eventually. But in the meantime, all of the individual choices and changes that we can make as individuals will help get us there, even if people aren't doing everything perfectly. It's something that everybody can access a little bit and incrementally discover the wonder of plant-based food. And in Bristol, we're absolutely spoiled for choice. That there's everything is everywhere. It's brilliant. And but not everybody is as lucky as that where they live. So it's understanding that. And if you live in a food desert, or you don't have access to the ingredients in some places, and there is a time cost to it as well. And understanding that if we all do the little bits that we can and make those incremental changes, then we make a difference. And I think I'd be a powerful advocate for that message as well.
Sorry about that, Thomas. So this is the written response to the first question from Chas Warlow. Chas says, I've been a vegetarian for the last 30 years. I changed my diet because I believe that as a society, we can have a more compassionate, environmentally aware approach to our agricultural system. But I'm not a vegan, and as a result, it wouldn't feel honest to advocate radical target setting and telling other people that they have to change their diet. As deputy leader, I would approach the topic of veganism as part of a wider conversation about justice, climate justice, animal welfare, food sovereignty, and public health. I'm proud that the Greens have long been a political home for many who recognize the environmental and ethical case for plant-based living. And I'm a strong advocate for the policies in our manifesto that support sustainable food systems, such as reducing intensive animal agriculture and supporting farmers to transition. At the same time, I recognize that within our movement and beyond, people have different relationships with food, shaped by culture, access, health needs, and lived experience. I don't believe in purity politics or judgment. I believe in meeting people where they are, building trust, and showing how food policy can be bold and fair, supporting rural livelihoods, nourishing communities, and reducing emissions. So I will speak publicly with clarity and compassion, championing plant-based options and systemic change, but always in a way that's inclusive and grounded in solidarity, not division. That's how we grow a movement strong enough to transform the future.
Thanks so much for that, Meghan. Thomas, I believe you had raised your hand first, and then Alex, we'll go on to you.
I was just going to add to the, sorry, it's quick. My cat is being extremely needy today. So if I'm looking like I'm being distracted, it's because they're causing havoc. I'm waiting for the parents to get back with some food for them. So they're being an absolute nightmare. Yeah, so I was just going to add to the second bullet point on this, which is universities, hospitals, and council success. I think one of the biggest areas which is missing, I know there's etc., but I would say schools, primary and secondary schools are that biggest area, because that's, I know I touched on that it's the education, but that ability for when children growing up, they explore new things. They always kind of, that's our time for education. And I always found that when I was at school, that other than jacket potato and beans or something like that, there wasn't any choice for food. There wasn't, that wasn't there as an option, or when it was a premium option that was more expensive for me as a child. So I always think that, yeah, if we're going to kind of create the movement for change, it needs to be massively embedded in education, and that has to start with schools, because unfortunately, a lot of people when they grow up become a little bit more stuck in their ways when it comes to foods. So that would be something that I do. I do it a lot anyways. I go into a lot of schools. Being a young counsellor, schools love having me there to talk and educate people.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Thomas. All right, Alex, we've got you, and then we'll move on to Frank.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's only a very brief point. That I think on the point of universities, hospitals and councils, that's a really procurement policy, which is possibly the least interesting subject that's going to come up this evening, is a really strong way that these bodies can use to promote the usage of plant-based stuff, because we do the same at our council with promoting a real living wage and zero carbon renewable energy, and we can definitely include in procurement policies promotion of plant-based options.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Frank?
I just wanted to come in a little bit because I think some of the conversation from and the answers from other candidates and this question around affordability, I just want to talk a little bit about my experience. So I live in a rural part of England. I am very, very lucky to live in a village now where my mum has set up the first vegan cafe that we've ever had here. So I have an option. But before that happened, and that was post-pandemic, there was no option for me. And if you go that way from my house down the road, there is an enormous chicken farm. And if you go that way, there is a local farm, a dairy farm. And the difference in those two worlds is enormous. And experiencing that my whole life, seeing that growing up around that, makes me very aware of what we eat and how we do. And so that's a big part of what I do. But I want to just talk a little bit about cost of living crisis and the pandemic. And that during the pandemic, we saw that the sale of meat substitutes did decline, and part of that was due to this cost of living that people are going through, feeling the pinch in their pockets. And I think a lot of what we've got to do as Greens, and this is part of our policy, part of what we stand for, is the promotion of local farming and making sure that we as well have a food system which is fair. And we're talking about that systematic change, but also recognizing that this is accessible for people, but sometimes those alternatives aren't readily discussed about, and that we actually need to make sure that we're transitioning away from this mass marketed stuff for us and finding the simpler alternatives that are often at home in our communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we've got Thomas again.
Sorry, I wanted to come in a little bit on that, in that as someone that, again, does represent massive rural communities and an awful lot of farms, that it's quite difficult for farmers to be able to move away from, majority of farms are profitable because of meat production, because that's what sells in the country. It's quite difficult for a lot of farms to move away from meat production, become profitable on our own kind of, we call it a herbal kind of growth, because of the way that our economy is set up. So it's a lot harder than just kind of going, let's promote the local farms that grow things, because they all end up getting sold to, a lot of them get sold to a big market as well, like Sainsbury's, Tesco's and all that. So it's a lot more complicated. But and then also the last point is that there isn't really a cost of living crisis. What it is the economic crisis is this crisis of inequality. And I really want to make sure that the Greens are very, very clear on that point, because if we call it a cost of living crisis, it almost distracts us from the idea that actually it is an inequality crisis.
Thank you so much for that, Thomas. All right, Ani, you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just also wanted to comment on that as well, is that because I represent an inner city ward and I live in the inner city myself, and where I live in my ward, it is a food desert. We've got a Tesco Metro that has a a small shelf that has a free from section. They do sell some tofu, but it sells out all the time. You know, there are loads of options. This is Bristol, where we've got a huge amount of vegan options, a huge amount of plant-based options, but actually getting, if you live in the city centre, or if you live in a part of the city that doesn't have a supermarket at all, you are limited on what you can access. Though you could go to, there are great cash and carries, there's great scoop places where you can take your own bags and you can refill everything, you know, but there's a time cost to that. And then for a large quantity of my residents, they live in tiny flats that don't have any kitchen space, so you can bulk buy food by ordering in, and that becomes more cost effective, but then you haven't got anywhere to store it. There's a whole bunch of intersectional issues that just make it a little bit hard and a bit inaccessible and more expensive, because, you know, people quite often don't have the money to go and do a big shop and buy elsewhere and get it delivered in or whatever. There are ways around it, but it's not always quite as simple as that, and that's something that we need to have in awareness when we're looking and talking about this, because if we don't, then we alienate a huge amount of people. So we have to have it in awareness and have to be sensitive about how we talk about it, as for lots of people, even if there are ways around it, it's perceived to be more expensive, and there's lots of reasons for why that is. So it's about having sensitivity around that side of things. It's really important.
So what for you is the relationship between veganism and other social justice issues? So we've got Thomas first, followed by Rachel, Frank, Ani, Alex, and then Chas. All right, Thomas, would you like to go first?
I would love to go first, because then I can kick this one out of the room and go give us some food. So yeah, I will disappear in a minute for that. So for me, the relationship is again, it's that kind of social inequality, inequality about how you get your food, something that Annie was talking about earlier, and that just how inaccessible sometimes it can be is very much kind of depending on where you live. If you live in a more affluent area, there's more options. So it goes hand in hand with that. It goes very hand in hand with the climate justice as well. And I think there is so much to be learned from how we tackle this as an issue, and how we promote more people to go to plant-based diets, and how we can then learn from it and then transfer it into other areas of social justice that we can learn from it, and we can replicate that. For me, veganism is a really good way of testing some of these measures, because it's not as controversial of an issue. We can learn a lot more from it, and that to me that's kind of it. Is just the learning from it, and how we can do. Sorry, I'm getting really distracted. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to take that one out, and then I'm going to be fine for the next question. And I really apologize for all this. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you. Rachel, you're up next.
Thank you. Yes, so veganism and, well, plant-based diets, the food we eat, the food systems is really important in terms of social justice locally and globally. The way that we produce and consume food today definitely drives climate breakdown, which deepens inequality and causes immense harm to animals, people, and the planet itself. Inequality is, of course, the major theme here. We could feed the world, we could feed the hungry. We feed vast amounts of grain to livestock while millions go hungry. And factory farms exploit animals, but also workers, and also rivers and other parts of nature as well. Marginalised communities, particularly in the global south, are on the front lines of the environmental damage that is caused by industrial animal farming. So it all intersects in different ways. There is, of course, the issue that farmers themselves often can't even afford to sell their crops. instead they're leaving them in the land around where I am. It's absolute madness. The system is so broken, and you find that the mental health of farmers is suffering completely because of that. Where I live, there's a lot of local community farms who have direct routes to market, which is wonderful, healthy, organic, fabulous food, but it's unbelievably expensive. So again, you have this inequality playing out at a local level where wealthy people have access to health through their diet more than others. So food justice definitely has to be part of the wider take on justice. We have to rethink what we grow, who benefits, how we care for animals, and how we want this economy to work for everybody to be healthy in ourselves, in our bodies, to be healthy and balanced with other beings and the rest of nature, and to look after the whole planet.
Thank you. My politics is rooted in this, and I wasn't political at all. I'm not lucky enough to be from a family that was political, that raised me in a way where I felt like these things were accessible to me. And it was when I was about 15, 16 years old, and I decided that, that these issues right in front of me, the things that I was putting in my body weren't what I wanted, the values that I wanted to live by. And so for me, veganism, social justice are absolutely interlinked. And they're actually inseparable. It's racial justice here and globally, because it's the impact on the climate, but also the wages, the global system, and how broken that is. This broken system which thrives on inequality. It's justice for people with disabilities, those who have certain dietary requirements and problems which aren't catered for. It's class justice, which doesn't think about inequality and education, access to that in a postcode lottery system that we have for everyone. And of course, it's environmental justice and how the climate, biodiversity, and nature crisis impacts each and every one of us, and also non-human beings. And for me, all of that comes together in making a fairer and kinder future possible for each and every one of us. And so for me, these things are absolutely interlinked. And when I think about the Green Party, when I think about my politics, when I think about the role that I play in trying to make that kind of society, all of these things come together. It's about leading with compassion, and it's about making sure that everything from the food that's on our plate that comes from somewhere that's ethical, from being able to purchase that food and it to not impact our pocket, for it to have not traveled around the globe at an expensive cost to those that have grown it, or from our back garden, because sometimes, and we forget this, that the meat that can come from our local community can be worse for the environment than a banana that's been flown around the world 6 times. And those are the things which we need to talk about, and how we make sure that everyone has access to this kind of future that we want to create.
Okay, and that's 2 minutes. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Frank. Ani, you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, veganism is not just about a diet, is it? It's a philosophical basis and a way of approaching the world and viewing the world, and taking a stance against oppression of a range of against humans, against animals, and that's what social justice is as well. It is how humans and animals are exploited by the system and by capitalism in particular. So one of the things I do love about veganism is it is challenging the oppression, exploitation of animals, but also the workers that produce the food and of the planet that is producing it. And it's been touched on already about food waste, and we need to be talking more about food waste. And it's not just food waste in the field, it's food waste in the supermarket that's not being sold, and food waste in the individual fridge as well. And that's something we need to be talking more about and tackling more. We need to be tackling food deserts so that people have access to quality food, locally produced food that's not flown around the world, it's not mass produced, it's not factory farmed, it's good quality, locally produced food at an affordable price that also gives a livable wage to the producers of it, which is what we're not doing at all with capitalism, basically. It's also not just about food, it's also about the clothes that we wear and what they're made out of. That's something I'm very passionate about through my work, is material content and the fabrics that we wear and the choices that we make about them, and then the huge amounts of clothing wastage and the resources that takes to produce those clothes in the first place. And we also, it's understanding it's not an easy choice because of there are veganism and making the choices that people would like to do. There's a huge amount of people who would like to choose differently, but it's inaccessible to them, and it could be about money, it could be because of food deserts, it could be because they've got intolerances or disabilities that or they're time poor. There's a whole range of reasons, and that's something we have to be empathetic about and understanding. And we need to be talking more about our use of resources and how we use them in a completely inequitable manner currently, and talking about how and increasingly moving towards a society where we do use our resources in an equitable manner, which is what we're not doing at the moment.
Thanks, Annie. I'm afraid I'll have to stop you there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So there's no timer.
Sorry. Yeah, we'll try to fix that in the next round. Apologies for that.
All right, Alex, you're up next, please.
Thank you. So I think I definitely agree with Frank that there is a huge relationship and they are intrinsically linked. I mean, we know that meat eating in the UK has fallen in the last few years, and it's not because more people are choosing a plant-based diet. It's because more families and children are facing increasing levels of poverty as a result of Conservative and Labour austerity. And I know, when I was young and I didn't eat my dinner, my parents would say to me, there are children starving in Ethiopia and you should be grateful for what you've got. And now I tell my children that there are probably children in their class at school who don't have 3 good meals a day. So, we're in a despicable situation in a so-called developed country where this is being made worse by choice by the Labour government. So we know that it costs more to eat healthily in this country, let alone make the choice to eat a plant-based diet. And I think with our lack of employment rights, our lack of affordable housing, the lack of ability, particularly of those living on the edge, to enforce their employment and tenants' rights that people in theory have, it's entirely understandable that many, many people simply don't have the capacity to consider veganism as a choice. So if we want more people to be vegan, we have to break down those barriers. So we should be lifting the 2-child benefit cap, and we should have a universal basic income, which I'm sure everyone else agrees with as well, which could lift people out of poverty. This additional income, I think, could then allow us to implement taxes for unhealthy and environmentally harmful foods. I mean, it is ridiculous that if you buy a pint of milk in the shop, it's cheaper than if you get milk from a local farm. Even though it's got thousands of intrinsic carbon miles in it, it's just ridiculous. A human right to a safe, secure, warm, and affordable to live in home could provide peace of mind. The right to humane treatment in employment from day one with fast and free enforcement could give it security to all. And I think taken all together, those things could give many more people the space to choose veganism. And for those that don't, encourage them to make better choices for animals and environment more often.
Okay, so Chas says, for me, veganism is connected to broader struggles for justice, whether we're talking about climate justice, workers' rights, racial equity, or public health. It's about challenging extractive systems that prioritize profit over well-being of animals, people, and the planet. The same industrialized food systems that exploit animals often rely on the exploitation of land, labor, and resources, disproportionately harming low-income communities, people of color, and small-scale farmers, both in the UK and globally. Veganism, when framed through a social justice lens, can be part of reimagining a food system that is compassionate, resilient, and fair. But that requires us to go beyond individual choice and focus on systemic change. That means supporting just transitions for farmers, making healthy food accessible to all, and tackling the root causes of inequality in our food economy. In this sense, veganism isn't a standalone issue. It's part of a larger movement for dignity, sustainability, and equity. And that's the kind of green politics I believe in: intersectional, inclusive, and driven by hope.
Thank you, Meghan, for that. Perfect, folks. If anybody has a rebuttal or a point that they would like to make, please feel free to do so. All right, we've got Thomas, who's got his hands up.
Hello, yes. I can't seem to be able to turn my camera back on. I think that might be settings of the host or something. But I wanted to kind of give a little bit of a story and kind of how. So I got very sick with COVID during the COVID times, if anyone ever remembers those. And during which from being vegetarian from 6, it meant that my body, anyone that has any does a little bit more on science will know that that kind of time is very important for building up immune systems and kind of just general how your digestive system works. So for me, I can't really eat meat even if I wanted to now because it would make me very sick. While I was ill with COVID, I got given something that had meat in it without me really realizing. I ate it and it gave me onset chronic fatigue. And because of that, it meant that I actually wasn't able to complete my A levels properly. I wasn't able to attend school. I was extremely sick during all of it. And it left me with actually the only choice in my life for employment at the time when I left school was really working for McDonald's or, you know, somewhere that employs a lot of people. So for me, I kind of saw firsthand what, you know, mass production of food, meat-based food can do to a society, do to one's personal health, and just the effect that it has on it. And I left a lot of those shifts when I was feeling very depressed, feeling very worn out because of, you know, just the environment that I was in from working in a place like that. And then, you know, I also look at the other social justice issues and kind of think about, you know, the NHS is a massive one as well. You're more likely to get cancer if you eat red meat. It has a massive strain on a lot of stuff. So for me, I have a lot of personal kind of, you know, actually veganism, people's diets can massively influence how the rest of your life works. So I just wanted to bring that up. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to give a proper answer earlier.
So our third question is, how would you improve public awareness of the rights and needs of captive animals, including the idea that animals should be given choices? For example, whether or not to take shelter, whether or not to eat treated feed. Now, this is from our friends over at Greens from Animal Protection. One more question that I would like to add over here, which came from our audience, was, will you promote alternatives and the move away from animal testing and vivisection?
Hi, yes. So I'm sure it's the goal of some people here to not have animals in captivity. That may be an end goal, but I really passionately believe that it is very important and a pragmatic reality that we take the best care of the animals that we do look after in captivity that we can. I think I joined Compassion in World Farming when I was about 8. I was in a family where mum wouldn't allow us to eat any factory farm meat and made that very big deal after that, and was often advocating that cause. And wherever we went, she'd always ask whether everything was free range. And at that time, that was actually quite a big step, and it was quite an important thing for me. I remember also being incredibly proud of her when she stood on the Coventry City Airport runway to stop the live transportation of cattle. And so the care of animals absolutely is so vital, and where I think kindness and compassion are so important, and understanding that it's how I think our relationship with the whole of nature needs to change, is that we're used to this idea of our dominance. It's actually a relatively recent idea in terms of the whole of human history, but that humans have dominance over nature, and nature's there as our resource, and that includes animals. And I think the whole of that relationship needs to shift from animals, but also to water and plants, and actually everything, that we need to work much more together to sort of find ways to cohabit and live well. But it does mean understanding that animals are sentient, kind of having that embedded in our education, that deep sort of sense of respect, shifting that public narrative, absolutely stronger welfare standards. I mean, you know, factory farming is horrendous. And again, that's just to do with the scale of our expectation for this product that is meat, and the detachment we have from it in terms of the fact that it is animal. And though I'm not a vegan, so I'm actually not against humans necessarily taking part in the food chain, except that we've gone so far away from what would have been a different relationship with it. But I think part of it is the sanitization of that, and the fact that we just see plastic packaging slabs of tasty things, rather than understanding that that is a sentient being and having that relationship. And actually for me, that's understanding that, again, all life is sacred. And so, yes, there's so much more we can do. And I don't have specific policies to draw on, but I'd absolutely support that. In terms of animal testing, I mean, yeah, just thinking of, Anita Roddick back in the day. Of course, we should never use animal testing for any kind of products, cosmetics, that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know when it comes to medical stuff, whether it's an absolute. I couldn't, to be honest, I'd need to have a lot more chats with some medical people about that and think about that more widely. Maybe it should be, but I don't feel clear on that at this point. But certainly in terms of any kind of cosmetic products, that sort of thing, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. Frank, you're up next.
For me, all of this really centers around consumerism. And we are talking specifically about diet tonight, but everything that we're talking about is the way that we consume. And it's the way that we consume food, this mass production that relies on factory farming. It's the way that we consume clothes and throwaway fashion. It's the way that our society is built under this capitalist structure, which forces us to shell money out of our pocket to big business, the billionaires and the rich get richer, and a system which thrives on inequality. And for me, taking a step out of that through my vegan diet is my way of saying, I don't accept this and I won't be a part of it. Other people, for whatever reasons, take part in that system, in that society. What I think we have to do as politicians is to make steps for that to be broken down, for that consumerism to be broken down. And we can do that on a very local level through the provision of allotments. We can do it through community farming. We can do it by supporting those locally growing the food that we eat. But ultimately, it's about giving choice for all and making sure everybody has the opportunity, when they do part with their cash, to make a choice that they want to make. And I think when we talk to people, when I talk to friends and to family and to people in the community that I represent, everybody wants a kinder, more compassionate society. Nobody wants to see animals harmed. And I think that that's something which, in Britain, we have made huge strides, and we should be quite positive about the things that have been done. But at times this comes with a level of greenwashing and pretending that everything's fine and there isn't more work to be done. So I absolutely want to see a move away from animal testing, away from vivisection. I think that animals should have this right to roam, to be able to move at their free will. That is the kind of choice that we would want for ourselves and for the animals that we eat. We want to be able to put things in our bodies that make us healthy and to be able to make informed decisions. So I think we have a real responsibility to shine a light on that, and I'm very much committed to doing so.
Thank you so much for that, Frank. Really appreciate it. Ani, you're up next, please.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just to answer from the off, the sort of additional question about promoting alternatives and moving away from animal testing and vivisection, absolutely. In terms of my own choices, that is something I would never buy anything that I know has been tested upon animals. It's something I've been very furiously supportive of, moving away from any form of animal testing for a long time. But to the substantive question itself, it's about storytelling. It's about connecting. We know the problems of capitalism and how it exploits the resources of the world and how it exploits animals, workers, the planet, everything that we have in an inequitable way in order to make the most money for corporations and to the capitalist structure. We know that. That's why we're members of the Green Party. That's why we're involved in what we're doing. But what we're not doing enough, and what we need to do more, is to tell the story of why that matters and why it's important. And that's what I would seek to do, not just when it comes to the rights of animals, but for everything that we are fighting for in the Green Party. It's about telling the story, connecting with people's emotions, connecting with the electorate, with our residents, with the world at large, about the importance of this, why it matters, why actually their choices matter, and they're not an insignificant cog in a big machine that has no power. Take it, Palestine at the moment, so many people feeling powerless, saying, oh, these things are happening, there's genocide happening, and nobody can do anything about it, we're all powerless. We're not powerless. By empowering all of us to know that we have a voice and there are things that we can do, those are the stories we need to be telling. And it's for the children of Gaza, it's for the animals of the world, it's for every or times up, but it's basically tell the stories, connect with people's emotions. That's what we need to do as a party, and what deputy leaders and leadership need to do.
All right, Alex, you're up next.
Thank you. I don't know what it says about possibly the generation of myself and Rachel, that Anita Roddick and the Body Shop was the first thing I thought of on the question about animal testing and vivisection. And I think that actually tells us, is a good example of the power of storytelling. It was a core part of their brand that they didn't use any of this testing, and how it appealed to consumers when they were given the choice and able to afford those things, that they chose a kinder products. And Britain is well known, I think, as a nation of animal lovers, and I think will largely choose animal products when held to a high standard. Again, to riff on something Rachel was talking about with free range meat, I think assurance schemes and how these are measured is a really important part of consumer education. I had a friend in school whose dad owned a chicken farm. We went over to play games or whatever, and I saw the inside of the chicken barn, and it was ostensibly a free range chicken barn, and it had the chickens were free to go outside, but the barn was absolutely packed full of chickens, mostly not choosing to go out and roam where they could. And I think this is a good example of sometimes how we all probably choose, if we choose to eat meat, choose the highest standards we can, but even those standards can sometimes be subject of empathy washing, I think is the term I'd find for that. We have examples like the Red Tractor assurance scheme that exists to tell people that they're buying stuff that has a high quality to standard for the animals they're purchasing. But the problem is the Red Tractor scheme is an example being funded by the farming industry to promote their own products rather than provide genuine independent assurance of high standards. So, you can buy something that's very high quality, allegedly, but it actually isn't. So I think what we need is simple to understand, required labelling of products to inform customers and the conditions those animals are kept in. I'm just about run out of time, so I will stop there.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right, Thomas, you're up next.
Yeah, the whole situation just makes me so angry. I don't really know how else to put it other than I'm just horrified by how it works. I was always told when I was at school was that you could take humans out of the world and everything would go back to being absolutely normal, and animal populations would thrive. The reality is you can't do that anymore because we've embedded ourselves so much for they're reliant on us to survive. The aviation flu is probably one of the examples that I would give, is that we've created this society and this environment in which things can no longer exist without us. So we can't just immediately stop how we do things now. We now need to work in a way of actually going over that line and being supportive of animals and their own ecosystems. So I don't, firstly, I want to say that I'm hugely grateful of the work that the Greens for animal protection have done. I've seen a lot of it. It's incredible. And one of the things that always gets me is that these kind of what Alex was talking about, these reassurance schemes, is that there are so many loopholes in where they can run because of the way that our government runs and that they can be lobbied. There's always going to be loopholes in these systems. We saw it with the RSPCA assurance, which led to Chris Packham's resignation. And I think on hair products and stuff is that they can say that they're animal cruelty free, but actually the testing process for that hasn't been, but just happens to be that everything in that bottle hasn't been tested on animals, so they can get away with things. we need to really close those loopholes. We need to really protect animal rights, because if not, we could put ourselves in serious harm as well. But yeah, I'll stop there. But it's also a really privileged position to be able to kind of talk about a lot of this, is one of the things that I always find.
Thank you for that, Thomas. Meghan, if you could please read the response from Chas.
Yes. So Chas says, I believed we need to shift how we talk about animals in our society, from passive objects of care or utility to sentient beings with needs, preferences, and the right to agency. Raising awareness starts with storytelling and education. As deputy leader, I would support campaigns and public messaging that highlight the lives of captive animals, whether in agriculture, zoos, or domestic settings, not just the harms they face, but the richness of their behaviors when they're allowed freedom and choice. That includes spotlighting positive examples where animals are given more autonomy, like enriched environments, choice-based feeding, and access to shelter on their own terms. But we also need to back that with policy, ending intensive confinement, banning cruel practices, and putting welfare standards on a rights-based footing. Giving animals choices should not be a luxury, it should be a principle.
Thank you so much for that, Meghan. Question number 4 is, how would you tackle the issue of housing whilst balancing the delicate act of protecting nature and wildlife? This is again from our friends at GAP, which is Greens for Animal Protection. So Frank, you're up first.
For me, the answer is yes, absolutely. We can protect nature whilst building, and it's the role of us as elected councillors like myself to be able to represent our communities well and ensure that any building, whether it be a house building, whether it be infrastructure, energy projects, are done in a way that are protecting our communities, protecting the people that live here, and making sure that they're suitable for the environments that they're going to be within. We can talk about Swift and bee bricks that could be part of housing, and we're seeing those more and more, and medium density housing, and how we get wildlife corridors, and we make sure that the things we build are done in a mindful way. And I think that's often the problem, that there isn't this approach that we in the Greens have, this holistic view, attempt to plan, to set up, to think about what we're doing. But instead things are done at a piecemeal approach. Biodiversity net gain is one of the things that is coming in now, and while I think it's kind of flawed in a way in terms of how it allows for the destruction of nature, but okay, we'll rebuild it over here, and biodiversity not really working in that way. One of the things it fails to measure is that it considers a habitat, but not the animals that would have been in that habitat. It doesn't actively go out and count that and measure that, and that's something that could be changed. And I'll briefly just talk about sort of solar farms that I've had proposed in my area, and one which I supported and one which I didn't. And again, that was about the engagement that I had from the developers and the plans that they put forward, whether or not they were going to have mammal gates in the fencing around that project, whether they were going to be having wildflowers, how that land was going to be used. And I think it's just so important that we on a local level are making sure we deliver the best we can for our communities. And in a national role like the deputy leadership, we're talking about this in a way that makes sense to people and making sure we get the homes that people need in a way that works for everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Frank. Ani, you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so the original question was like, can we balance it? Yes, absolutely. And the thing is that we need to flip the conversation, because we're not talking about, there isn't a housing crisis. There is a crisis of availability of already existing housing. What we have is, when developers are building on greenbelt land, they're not building homes that are for the people who need homes. They're building, and developers generally are building investments. They're not building homes. And we need to recognise what the housing crisis is for what it is. And it is, what we need to be looking at and talking about is the huge amount of existing properties that are empty, that have been built for investors, never to be lived in, never to have a home in them. That's not what they're there for. They are there as investments for hedge funds and speculators, because that's what capitalism is, and it's huge, particularly in our cities. we need to be talking about retrofitting existing buildings to make them fit for habitation, and retrofitting already homes to make them more energy efficient and more sustainable in how they run. We need to be removing the ease to purchase and have second homes and large property portfolios for landlords. And we need to be talking about using the brown belt, the sort of the grey land that we already have that has no ecological value, build on those spaces rather than building onto the green belt. We need to flip the entire conversation around. There's not a housing crisis. It's not a delicate balancing act, because we have the space for people to live in. We have buildings, we have homes already there. They're just empty, or they're investments for developers and hedge funds. And we need to be talking about that rather than buying into this false narrative about a housing crisis where we have to build on greenbelt land because we've got no other option. That's not what the situation is at all. And we need to be much more vocal about that.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Annie. All right, Alex, you're up next.
Thank you. So I definitely agree that we can protect nature and wildlife while building housing if that's needed. Now, if Labour passed their planning and infrastructure bill that's in Parliament at the moment, it's going to get a lot more difficult to protect that balance. And indeed, the tilted balance that the National Planning Policy Framework has brought in, where there's not a 5-year land supply for housing, is already made this very difficult. That speculative applications on greenland, have to get approved if we don't have that supply. In Worcester, at our last council meeting, we passed a motion proposed by my co-leader, Councillor Karen Lewing, titled "Prevent a Licence to Kill Worcester's Nature," that addressed this issue with the planning and infrastructure bill, because the idea that you can protect wildlife by allowing it to be destroyed and at some point in the future deliver a replacement somewhere else is, if you'll pardon the pun, for the birds. So we need to fix our current legislation to remove loopholes that allow developers to mitigate destruction of nature and wildlife by investing in nature stores elsewhere. And we need the government to step in and start building on brownfield sites. Just in my ward, there is planning permission to build homes on a brownfield site that is near expiring with no homes built. We know that there are 1.4 million homes granted planning permission in the last 20 years that have not been built. And we can well imagine why this is happening. It's not just, as Annie was talking about, with developers building them for investment. Developers are not even building homes because they can sell those homes later if they build them later on for a higher price. So if developers won't build and would prefer to try and build on sites that involves destruction of precious habitats, the government needs to step in and get those homes built itself. To give props to the Conservatives, the idea of biodiversity net gain in developments has been a good start. In Worcester, we installed an artificial pitch that, thanks to our pressure, brought with it a 40% net gain in biodiversity. And we need to go further than that. So biodiversity net gain and nature recovery runs through all new developments with a very high bar set before allowing mitigation is allowed away from the site.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. Thomas, you're up next.
Yeah, so as a council, my ward is Rington Ward. It is an SIA, so it's a scientific interest area. I have the horseshoe bats, one of the most protected areas, or one of the most crucial areas environmentally for that species. We will never solve the problem with the housing crisis. Unfortunately, to disagree with Annie, that there is a housing crisis. There are not enough homes, even if we include the ones that are already built, and you start to transfer some of the empty office blocks into apartment buildings. We need to move away from this private monopoly of house building. We can't continue in the way that it is. Unfortunately, also, we can't pressure these companies to build the houses that these private companies have already got planning permission for, because to do that would crash the housing market. And if you crash the housing market, you put so many people in this country, so many working class people, into a difficult situation, an impossible situation where they own their house and the mortgage is worth 2-3 times the value of their house. It's such a sensitive area that we have to be really, really careful on, because otherwise we can bankrupt working class families and leave them stranded where they live, and they will not be able to move out of that house. So we need to be really careful on this. The best way to push forward with it is for local authorities to be given the powers to build council housing in the areas that they feel is the best for residents and for the environment. It's something that I'm really massively trying to push for here in North Somerset. Unfortunately, we are getting lobbied by government to push for private developing housing because local authorities do not have the money or the resources to be able to build their own housing, or the powers either. So I have a huge amount of personal kind of interest in housing because I'm 21. I'm never going to be able to buy a house at this point if considering my financial position, considering where I live. But I'm also one of 8 people that live in a 4-bed house. So I really understand the pressures of housing.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Rachel, you're up next, please.
Hi. Yes, people have talked a lot about the problems, or some of the problems with the planning system. As someone who's like co-running a rural district council, we're going through a local plan process. I'm sort of very familiar with the utter failure of our planning system to deal with the housing crisis. It can't, because it begins and ends with developers' profit. And just like the food system, that isn't going to work if it's all based on profit. There is a better way. I think that's right. I think we do need to unlock the future of social housing. I think we're naive if we don't think we do have to build more. I think we have to build a hell of a lot more social homes, and that is what this country needs. If we hit our housing target in the current system, which is now very high, where around here, we still don't meet the housing need, and they'll be inaffordable. So that's the issue of the planning system. But yes, in terms of building homes whilst protecting nature and wildlife, I really truly believe we could build homes in a way where people and nature thrive together. I really believe we can cohabit on this planet. I think what that takes is creativity and design. And I had wonderful conversations recently with Jonathan Smales, who's director of Human Nature. They're a developer who actually, this is their mission really. He used to be a director of Greenpeace. He's now a developer trying to solve this problem. And actually, when you bring the best of human brains to the problem and creatively look at the design, there are many, many ways that we can help. We've talked about green corridors, there's nature-friendly designs, there's different materials, all sorts of things that we could go into, wildlife corridors, etc. I do think we can do it. And I think that also, this is where I think Britain really needs this injection of creativity, because I think that makes humans' lives better too. I think we are more, I'm with Thomas Heatherwick on this, that actually the kind of depression levels are partly to do with how our built environment is. And if it's beautiful and it's more integrated with nature, and we're cohabiting and thriving with nature, our own well-being, our own mental and physical health will be better. And so I do think that's a big missing piece of the puzzle, and I do have hope and belief that we can do it together.
Thanks so much for that answer, Rachel. Meghan, you're up next with the response from Chas.
Okay, Chas says, can we build homes for humans whilst also protecting wildlife? Yes, but only if we stop treating housing and nature as competing interests. The truth is we need both, and we can design for both if we change the model. That means building genuinely affordable, well-insulated homes in places people want to live, not paving over green spaces, but reusing brownfield sites, repurposing empty buildings, and planning with nature in mind. We can create housing developments that include green corridors, native planning, and space for biodiversity, where people and wildlife live side by side, not in conflict. The climate and biodiversity crises are interconnected, and so are the solutions. A green housing policy would treat access to shelter and protection of nature as joint priorities, not trade-offs.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Meghan. Folks, we can do a rebuttal round. Okay, great. Alex, you have your hand up, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a couple of things I really wanted to address here that are around the housing crisis. So it's not just private developers that are a problem. So registered social providers are also a massive problem. We have a site in Worcester, used to be our swimming pool, that we sold at a knockdown price to Sanctuary Housing, and they still years later have not delivered the 40 units they said that they were going to. We had a private development of 10 affordable homes in Worcester that no registered social provider wanted to take on because 10 homes was too small a site for them. And this is a huge problem where they are now huge businesses that aren't accountable to our residents. I think I know Thomas, I think, has also signed up to co-propose this. There's an abolished landlord policy being proposed to come to conference for Green Party policy that I would absolutely recommend everyone take a look at. It sounds a bit more drastic than the actual policy is, but it covers the area of abolishing right to buy and introducing policies to allow councils to buy houses that used to be social housing back. And I think that's really important to helping solve some of these problems so that people can have accountable landlords that aren't just in it to make money.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. Ani, you're up next.
Thank you. I mean, just to be clear, I've entirely got skin in the game, Thomas. Like, I'm 45 and I rent, and I have no hope in hell of buying anything ever. I've lived in social housing at various points in my life. I'm eligible for social housing right now, but I can't access it because we haven't got any, and we've got a waiting list of tens of thousands of people in Bristol. Now, I am talking about the housing crisis in a urban context rather than a rural context, and I chaired planning in Bristol for my last 2 terms. The first 2 terms as a councillor, I was chairing planning, and time again, I saw property developers saying that they couldn't afford any social housing within their development because of their viability, and arguing that they had to build on greenbelt land because we had a housing crisis. That we've also got our local plan underway at the moment. And we have housing targets put upon us by central government that they're not for social housing. They're not for the housing that we need. They are just numbers that we have to satisfy central government with. That's the conversation that we need to be flipping around and talking about, because those numbers, we could build all the numbers that central government asks us to, but we don't have to make any of them social housing. And therefore, we're not actually answering the housing crisis that we have, and we're not satisfying the need. And we need to flip that conversation around and really address what the actual issues are and where the problems are.
Thank you so much, Annie. Thomas?
Yeah, so like skin in the game. I mean, I sat in a council meeting about housing not too long ago, and I made up I brought up the point in that as a young person, I could not afford to buy, let alone rent somewhere. And I got turned around by another councillor, Lib Dem, quite elderly, turned around to me and said, why don't you just join the housing waiting list? Why don't you just get a social house? I was like, that's not how it works. It's extremely difficult to get one. And he went, oh no, you're just being naive, put yourself on the list. I think the idea around housing that we have for our elected representatives, because of how difficult it can be for elected representatives to be working class and to be young, I think they're just completely out of touch. And I think that's one of the big issues that we need to change, is actually how do we allow younger people, more working class people, to be in those positions to make change.
Question number 5 of 6. There's a lot of confusion about net zero, largely because the idea has been used, misused, and abused by corporate interests. How would you approach net zero? If you're critical of net zero as a concept and support an alternative approach, please feel free to say so. For this, Ani, you're up first.
Thank you. I'm being distracted now. I've got a child texting me questions about food, who's apparently starving to death. Yeah, so I mean, again, it's back to part of what I was saying about when I was chairing the planning committee in Bristol, is that the problem with net zero is that it's been skewed, and it's a good aspiration. It's certainly what we need to do. We definitely need to reduce our carbon emissions as a planet. But as with anything in a capitalist world, it's been skewed into different corporations, different developers, different entities, like feeling like they can offset it and like negate it somehow, when you can't negate it by just kind of going, well, I'll just pay some money in order to make myself feel better. You know, I can take more flights, but if I offset my carbon by doing something else. So what we need to do in terms of approaching it is approaching it in it's a good aspiration. It's a really important aspiration that we need to have. And the way in which we actually achieve it has to be actual change, systemic change to our behaviour, and it can't just be rich organisations, rich individuals offsetting their behaviour and continuing doing as they always did. It has to be systemic change for everybody in order to achieve it, and that's the thing that we need to be very clear about and talk about, and call out when there is that hypocrisy and the not, the offsetting and kind of making arm wavy. Well, we'll just offset it over there. That's, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Ani. Alex, you're up next, please.
Thank you. So I absolutely agree with the net zero, and it's something we need to do, and we need to do it as soon as possible. In Worcester, we've declared a climate emergency, and our net zero target is 2030, and we're quite worried with unitarisation that that's going to get lost, as our county council's target is 2050. But I think this is a good example when we talk about cutting through and improving our communications, that terminology like net zero requires a certain understanding that I think most voters don't have. So I would actually completely avoid the concept of net zero in our communications and our leaflets and publicity that we talk to people, because it's one of those things that people don't really understand, and the people who are opposed it appropriate the term, like our party, which we've successfully not mentioned so far, calling it net stupid zero, and all those kind of things. Whereas if we express what this actually means to voters in terminology they understand, I don't think anyone would disagree with it. So, the idea of having cheaper bills because you have solar power or wind power providing your energy, or battery power, for when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. We have better air quality so that, people aren't suffering from asthma or getting lung cancer or those kind of things. People have warmer homes through better insulation and cooler homes in the summer. That we have renewable energy that isn't putting more carbon that's been stored in the earth for thousands of years into the atmosphere, and that there are, the green economy opportunities that are really massive in this country that can make a lot of difference to a lot of people. I think back of the envelope calculation I did, it would cost like £100 billion to put solar panels on every single roof in this country, paired with a battery, and that could generate like 3 times our entire energy usage in the country. And that would provide, thousands of local jobs that are spread across the entire country. And there's a really big beneficial things that comes from voting green, that we don't need to talk about net zero as a concept. Like I said, we need to get to it as soon as we can. But, these are things that will benefit people, and that's how we should express it.
Thank you so much, Alex. Right. Thomas, you're up next, please.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if anyone can hear, but I have planes that go past up my house every 5-10 minutes. My ward has Bristol International Airport in it. It's one of the fastest growing airports in the country. It's a massive polluter. And every month I get to go along and sit on the ACC, so the Airport Consultative Committee, where we talk about net zero and how they, as a company, as an asset to the Southwest, as they call themselves, can get to this idea of net zero. And it's crazy, really, and how much that they, as an organization, put profit before they put the environment. And I sit there, I debate CEOs, planning people that are paid millions of pounds a year to basically say that net zero isn't worth it, the climate isn't dying. So I really have experience when it comes to kind of how do we talk about net zero and how do we make real change with that. In North Somerset, we have it as one of our key consultation points on every agenda item that is put forward, every motion that is put forward. And that has done so much to make a cultural shift as ourselves as a local authority. And I'll be pushing for national government to be able to have that. The only criticism I would have of net zero is A, it's not coming fast enough and there isn't enough investment behind it, mainly in the education side of it. We're not training people up quick enough. And B, how isolated it is to us as a country, because like people are saying, that they're getting offset. We buy energy in from other countries. We need to not be just talking about how do we as a country become net zero, but how does the world become net zero and a greener, fairer economy, basically.
Thank you so much for that, Thomas. Rachel, you're up next, please.
Hello. Yep, so net zero certainly can be misused and abused. It can be a kind of empty slogan. We know the phrase carbon neutral can often mean a hell of a lot of greenwashing, ineffective carbon offsetting, that kind of thing. But I think the fundamentals of net zero are vital for the future of this planet. I don't think abandoning them at this point would serve anybody. And I think it is worth getting local, national, and global commitment when they're done right, and communicating that is vital. So that obviously just means actually cutting emissions, not outsourcing them, not relying on dodgy offsets, not pushing the cost onto the global south. And it also means nature restoration at scale. People think about renewables, but I think, again, in terms of public messaging and certainly at council, helping people understand that nature restoration is a really key part of that is vital. But also taking, again, the example of council, we've just launched a new climate change strategy, which is quite extensive. But it's really important. You can look at your own emissions, but then you look at the emissions of the suppliers, and then you kind of go beyond that again. And we need to just be really honest. There's a lot of dishonest accounting that goes on, as I say, pushes it onto the global south, and we basically ship things overseas and then they can deal with that. Or we don't include flying. It's quite often the thing, these kind of amazingly glaring basic lies. But we absolutely need fast, deep reductions in energy, transport, food and land use. We really do. We have to root this green vision for net zero in justice. It's not just about carbon, it's about power, fairness, inequality, isn't it? And making sure the transition uplifts everybody, making sure it benefits ordinary people and their daily lives. We're already seeing the impact of climate change. Everybody should understand how we need to redress that. We talked about, or Alex has talked about, jobs and that side of it as well, and how it can boost our economy. So yeah, let's tell the positive story and do the right thing.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Frank, you're up next.
Back. So the first thing that I ever did as a campaigner in my local area was to present a petition to the county council asking them to declare a climate emergency. And my county council was run by Conservatives. And shortly after receiving that petition, they brought forward their climate plan. And I spent quite a lot of time trying to really go through the detail of that. And it was essentially a number fudge, which tried to equate their net zero based on a baseline of 2010, which is essentially when the Conservatives came into power at the council, outsourced all of their public services, got rid of everything, basically did a lot less, and weren't using pre-industrial levels to count what they were doing. And so my politics kind of came out of this whole, well, began in this world of realizing that they could masquerade and go out there and tell voters who are rightly concerned about climate change that they were doing the job and they were meeting their targets, but those really had no teeth. And so there's this real corporate feel, I think, and like the question poses, the whole concept of net zero has just been used, abused, and misrepresented to people. And so what I think we have to do is to take this corporate feel out of it and really connect with voters. And so when I ran for Mayor of the East Midlands, I presented my plan for the region, which was that of a green industrial revolution. And it was written with a pen and paper in a mind map style, so people could really see and engage with that. And it gave relevance to people when we talk about wanting to insulate people's homes so they can have cheaper bills, so that we can provide free public transport, so that we can make life easier, fairer, cheaper for people. And I think it's when we use this language that we can engage with people. And I've had that success through my social media. And I think it's really important that we just start to use this language that people actually can engage with, rather than trying to use these terms, which have been, unfortunately, taken away from us. We have to reclaim that narrative.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, Meghan, if you could read out the response from Chas.
So when the question is, how would you approach net zero? Chas says, net zero is not really a choice. It's a necessity to create a habitable planet. I'm sure Chas would have pronounced that correctly, for humans and all other species. The transformation of our energy system is already happening and will continue regardless of which party comes into power at the next general election, simply because renewable energy is becoming cheaper than fossil fuel energy. The issue is the speed of decarbonisation of our society. As deputy leader, I'd push for clear, binding plans to rapidly reduce emissions at source, not just balance them on paper. That means ending fossil fuel extraction, transforming transport, insulating homes, and investing in renewables. Where offsets are used, they must be strictly limited, transparent, and genuinely additional, not an excuse. Our tax system needs to be reformed to stop the direct and indirect subsidies given to fossil fuel companies. We need a climate framework built on fairness, honesty, and action.
Thank you so much for that, Meghan. All right, folks, last question of the day. As deputy leader of the Green Party, how would you promote a rapid and just transition for farmers away from animal agriculture, including dairy and egg production?
Yeah, look, I was going to be first anyway, so I don't have to feel bad. That's great. So yeah, as a leader and sometimes deputy leader of a rural district council, I do talk to farmers quite a bit. And I know that many of them do really care and want to do the right thing by nature. It's a group in huge financial jeopardy at the moment. I think over half of farmers are worrying their businesses will close this year. There's disproportionate risk of suicide within that community as well. The transition away from intensive animal agriculture is vital, and it must be just. And that means support and funding and listening rather than kind of blame or top-down diktats. I've had some involvement actually with the National Trust in some parts of the country and how they're working with farmers to help them transition to new skills, understanding how to restore nature and what that means, and to treat wildlife better, and also how to fundraise for government grants, which then fund them to look after nature. That's a massively different skill set from herding sheep. And so the support for that community in making that transition is vital. So yeah, farmers are already struggling. They're under debt, low prices, the system's broken. When arable farmers leave their crops in the ground because the supermarket prices don't justify the harvest, you know the system's completely and utterly failed us. So we need to know that the arable farming system is working, that there are strong routes to market, that it's fairly priced in order for people to transition. Yeah, let's make this about restoring land and livelihoods and local food economies, and again, create that vision of hope together.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Alex, you're up next.
Thank you. So I would push for a number of things to make this happen, which are, first off, as discussed earlier, reduce demand for animal products by using the buying power of councils and other bodies that we control to more often buy plant-based options. We need to tax environmental damage. So things like beef farming. I know that one of the things when I've talked about using oat milk, people say, "Oh, don't you know that's fantastically water intensive?" Well, the water intensity of plant-based milks is nothing compared to growing a whole cow to produce milk. So, we need to highlight those costs and make sure we are taxing the things. And obviously, beef production also brings methane, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas emissions as well. So that causes a huge problem. But if we're going to tax environmental damage and make it more expensive, we also have to be aware of the extra costs this places on the people with least in our society. So that's where our policies around universal basic income come in, to make sure we are not then just penalising people who aren't able to make those better choices already. And we need to bring in subsidies for farms to transition away from animal agriculture, because we can't just say we don't want these things to happen and then leave all these people who are working in our agriculture industry at the moment without anything to do. So we need to make sure that those subsidies are in place, and I think all those taken together should bring about the change that we want to see. I will try and address the question for the audience. So I think the thing is that all of those things I've just talked about will absolutely help. But if we want to slam the emergency brake on climate change, we actually need to deal with the biggest emitters in our country, which are not the animal industry. So the biggest carbon output is the biomass generation of electricity at Drax, which we need to get rid of. It's also steelworks, which we need to transfer over to electrical based options, and airlines. Thomas mentioned about Bristol Airport. Those are the things that generate the most carbon, and we need to cut as soon as possible.
Thank you, Alex.
Can I just say goodbye? I don't want to rudely walk out, but I do need to go and pick someone up. So,
Really, really appreciate you joining us here today.
no,
Great
thanks
to
ever so much for hosting it. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All right, we've got Thomas next.
I think the biggest underlying issue for farmers and how we support farmers while making a just transition, and something that hasn't been mentioned, and there's lots of controversy around it, but it's Brexit. It's the subsidies and that collaborative on, a European scale model of being able to work together in terms of not just the money, but the learning from other farmers across, the European Union has done so much damage. Like where I am now in North Somerset, farmers can't actually afford to buy the newer equipment, the cleaner equipment to be able to be greener farms. So many of them don't actually own the land. They rent the land at extortionate prices, but it's been family industry, so they want to keep that thing going. One thing that I was looking to do, I was going to submit it as a motion for national conference, but as I was running for deputy, I didn't want to kind of do it now. I was going to do it in the next one, but was look at actually the national government buying farms and then, allowing farmers to operate those farms on a way so that farmers aren't dealing with the pressure of paying the rent on all of these farms, but also then that we up the national wealth of the government. And that would be able to allow us to kind of have a little bit more influence over how we support farmers. But to actually slam the brake on this, I would argue that the meat industry is one of the biggest polluters in the country. And we really need to support them. And I think the only way to really do that is through financial and education. And I know many people don't like him, but Jeremy Clarkson doing Clarkson's Farm has added a lot of education to the country, and that kind of idea that actually after the first year of farming, he only made £47 if it wasn't for subsidies. They're so tightly stretched. We really need to support them if we're going to get anywhere near the goals that we are looking to get.
Thank you so much, Thomas. We've got Frank next.
We've talked about social justice a lot tonight, and rightly so, and about how a lot of the work that we need to do is to make Britain an equal country and a country which isn't in this inequality crisis. And often when we talk about this, we talk about it from the consumer point of view, and that makes sense. But I think that what we need to do is think about farmers, and that a large portion of people who are putting food on our plates in Britain are working class, they're struggling, and they're not making ends meet. These are often family-run businesses relying on their children to continue to keep their business alive. And the Labour government has just binned the Sustainable Agriculture Fund. We're taking away that support, that encouragement for farmers to do things in a better way, in a way that helps our environment, and a way which supports them financially to do so. And so I think we have a real responsibility as a political party to engage with the farming community, to engage with the NFU, to engage with unions, and to make sure that we are in direct contact with those that we're asking to make these changes. And we've seen on the inheritance tax issue that when something upsets farmers, they will come out in full force and they will make their voices heard. And so we need to make sure that there's cooperation, collaboration. And I think far too often as the Green Party, we're seen as a threat or an enemy to farmers. And when we go into the room and we talk with farmers, as I've done here, you can break down those barriers. During the general election, the first time I stood in 2019, the local farm that I was talking about earlier at the top of the hill here, I got an email saying, how dare I stand for the Green Party and the policies of being against badger culling and all these things and how it would impact them. I drove up the road and I went and knocked on the door and I had a conversation. And by the time that I left that house, we found so much more common ground. And I think that we have to go out there and meet people where they're at and try to find more of the common ground that we have if we're going to tackle the climate crisis, which ultimately impacts us all.
Thank you so much, Frank. Annie, you're up next.
Thank you. So we don't have any farms in Bristol. But I do have lots of friends who are farmers, and we have one farm in Bristol, which is called Yew Tree Farm. It's partly council-owned land as well. And the farmers that I know are the most avid environmentalists. And so in Yew Tree Farm, for example, they have cattle for grazing, because the grazing of cattle and a tiny little tiny baby, well, not baby, they're like tiny miniature cattle that they have, because it has a less impact on the land. And they use it to graze the SNCI, the special site of nature interest that they have there. And in that, the farmers there, which is a family-owned generational farm, take the most amazing care of the land that they are the caretakers of. And the same goes for farmers across the country. Farmers aren't against the environment. They work with the environment every single day. And they understand the impact and the importance of it. And what we need is financial support for farmers, which we are not giving, as has been touched upon by others already. Those financial supports have been removed. What we need to be doing is giving, in order to have an equitable, just transition to a more sustainable future, is financial support. We give financial support to train companies. We give financial support to water companies that do incredible ecological damage, but we don't give the financial support we need to farmers who are looking after our planet, looking after the earth, and they're providing us with the food that we need to sustain ourselves. And that's what we need over anything else, is the financial support and the educational support, so that farmers can move to the just transition, to a more sustainable way of farming through understanding of the land, or access to the machinery that they require as well. And that's the thing that we need to be advocating for more than anything else, is that support to get farmers to where they want to be themselves.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ani. Meghan, would you want to read out the response from Chas?
Yes, Chas says, I believe farmers are part of the solution, not the problem, but they need support. A just transition means giving farmers the tools, training, and security to shift towards more sustainable, lower impact farming, whether that's arable, horticulture, agroforestry, or regenerative practices. That includes investment in local food infrastructure, better supply chains, and guaranteed markets for plant-based and environmentally friendly produce. We also need to change the economic model, redirecting subsidies away from intensive livestock and towards sustainable livelihoods, carbon sequestration, and public goods. And we must make sure farmers themselves are part of shaping that change, not dictated to from above. This is about fairness, resilience, and climate responsibility, and it can only succeed if it brings rural communities with us.
Thank you so much, Meghan. All right, folks, we really appreciate all the deputy leader candidates who made it to the hustings today. Thank you so much. We know your time is extremely valuable and your campaign's on in full swing. So we want to wish all of you the very best. Meghan, do you have any announcements before we end for the evening?
Yes, thanks, Prashant, and thank you to all of the candidates. That was a really fantastic hustings, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions as well. It was really helpful to go through those. If you registered for this event, then we'll send you a follow-up email that has a link to the recording on YouTube. We'll send that to all the candidates too, so they can circulate it. And we'll also send a link to join the Vegan Greens email list. We're going to have a presence at conference, so keep an eye on the program. We'll have a meeting, and we'll also have a stall, so please come by and say hello. And please do get involved in Vegan Greens. So thank you again, everyone. Best of luck with the upcoming election, and let's stay in touch.